I'm Nick Schillingford coming to you from the Urban Cabin Studios in South Minneapolis with this interview on the situation in Syria. So, on Socialist News and Views, we let folks introduce themselves. Do you want to just tell listeners and viewers who you are?
Yeah, my name is Thomas Schmidinger. I'm an associated professor at the University of Kurdistan Hewlêr in Iraqi Kurdistan and a lecturer at the University of Vienna. I'm political scientist and social anthropologist working mainly on Syria, Iraq, the Kurdish question, but also on religious extremism. I say religious extremism because not only on Muslim extremism, I also recently wrote a book on Catholic traditionalism in Austria, for example, in German, uh, and on the relationship of religion and state uh, and migration. So I have some topics, but one of my focus is on Syria, especially on Syrian Kurdistan, I traveled to this region actually the first time when I was a student. I mean, Hafiz al-Assad is still alive, but since January 2013, I actually traveled every year at least once, sometimes twice or three times to the region and published quite a lot on Rojava.
Yeah, I've been reading your daily updates from Syria, which is helpful to understand a little bit more about what's going on. Um, because I feel like the information that's coming from the mainstream media is either, unclear or extremely biased in one way or another. Um,
I
so
do not know that much about the reporting in the UK or in the US, but
yeah,
one problem here, at least in the Austrian and German media, is that there are very, very few people who have even the basic knowledge of Syria. And those few journalists actually who have been there and who did reporting in the last years are super busy now. I'm giving at least 3 or 4 interviews a day, and I think one of the problems is that present day media do not have any permanent correspondence anymore. Many people who write about the Middle East do not have knowledge of the languages there. So, in general, I think the problem is mainly the quality of the information and not so much even the bias. But
oh
that's
yeah, it's
from
true.
my German and Austrian experience.
Well, there's a lot of moving parts, and also I think that they try to really simplify it. And again, you said, they don't start with much of a knowledge about what's going on, so
Yeah.
they probably simplify it incorrectly. But so I just wanted to quickly, you know, as people likely in my audience are aware, in 2011, people rose up against Bashir al-Assad as part of the art, in line with the Arab Spring.
Mhm.
And then this became a long running civil war with many factions. But on December 8th, in what I think to many was a huge surprise, Assad's government collapsed and Assad fled to Russia. Can you describe the forces on the ground now? Who are the main groups in control
Yeah.
of the country, and
Yeah.
what do you think we can expect from them?
Mm. Well, at least the speed was a surprise for everybody, I think,
Right.
how fast the regime collapsed. But what people who have a knowledge on Syria already knew is that the regime was very weak and strongly depending on Russia and Iran and the pro-Iranian proxies, especially Hezbollah. And the time of the collapse is cause connected to the fact that Hezbollah is seriously weakened after the Israeli attacks on Hezbollah and Lebanon. But also Russia is very busy with Ukraine. So it seems that neither Russia nor Iran were interested to save Assad's ass another time.
Hmm.
Concerning the forces on the ground, I think we have to differentiate between military forces and political.
Agreed.
At the moment, of course, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, a post-jihadi movement that originates in the Syrian branch of Al-Qaeda, of Jabhat al-Nusra, that was an official branch of Al-Qaeda of Syria until 2016, is for sure the strongest military actor at the moment at least in the core land of Syria. but it's by far not strongest politically group, or it doesn't have the support of the majority of the Syrians. There was already even political resistance against the rule of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in Idlib, where they ruled the Idlib governorate for some years now. So Syrians and even many of the Sunni Arab Syrians are not very happy with the way Hayat Tahrir al-Sham ruled Idlib. And this rule was a very, I mean, they didn't commit that horrible atrocities like ISIS, but it was still a very strict authoritarian Islamist regime with gender segregation in public to a certain degree, with at least some elements of Sharia law, and including political oppression against opponents, like political prisoners, torture, and all these things. So Hayat Tahrir al-Sham did not rule Idlib in a democratic way, and this is something most Syrians know, and even many Sunni Arab Syrians do not agree with. But let's go through the military forces for now, and then let's talk about politics after.
Absolutely.
So the military side of Quds, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is the most powerful militia movement, but we should not forget they were not the ones who liberated Damascus, the capital, but they were the ones who changed the whole power structure with their attack, with their successful attack on Aleppo. And then they moved forward to the south by taking Hama and finally Homs. But after the Battle of Homs, it was the local population and local militias from the south who took over the capital. In these last days of the regime, also some militias reappeared that already existed in the south of Syria, but went underground or to exile after the regime successfully, with the help of Iran and Russia, won the war, or the first round of the war, in the south of Syria. But they are in control of the southern governorates now, Quneitra, Dara, and Sueda. And these militias are politically very different. There are some, let's say, soft Islamists within this umbrella organization that is now called the Southern Operational Room. But most of them are secular, and some of them are not even Muslim, or at least not Sunni Muslim at all. For example, the Druze region, that is also called Jebel Druze in Syria, so the mountain of the Druze, is controlled by a local Druze militia that has nothing to do with political Islam or Islamism or anything like that. They are a strong secular opponent of any kind of Islam. Then there is a small military group that is something like a leftover of the old Free Syrian Army. Keep in mind, the Free Syrian Army that started, let's say, the war against the regime was never an army. It was never a unified armed group. It was more a label for very different militias. And I would say after the internal fighting within the Free Syrian Army of 2013 in the Aleppo governorate, where the Islamist branches of the Free Syrian Army kicked out the secularists, the Free Syrian Army as such did not exist anymore. So it doesn't make sense to talk about Jaish al-Hur, the Free Syrian Army, anymore after 2013. But some secular groups could survive in the southeast of the country, in the desert or semi-desert, where they more or less protected or worked together with the American base there in Atanf. And this group is called we call it in English, the Revolutionary Command Army. And they also played a significant role in the last days of the regime because they went to the northwest and also played a role in the liberation of Damascus, of the capital city. So these two military groups are definitely not jihadi and have a strong secular lead. And finally, of course, we also have the umbrella organization that is more or less led by the Kurdish People's and Women's Defense Forces. This umbrella organization is called the Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF, and they control nearly 1/3 of the Syrian territory. So they are definitely an important player, supported at least since the end of 2014 by the United States in their struggle against ISIS. This is important. It's mainly a support against ISIS, but it's not the support against the pro-Turkish militia. And this is now the next military actor, the so-called Syrian National Army. The Syrian National Army is misleading name actually, because it's neither Syrian nor an army, and it's definitely not national. It's a bunch of different militias, also a leftover of the old Free Syrian Army, but the other fractions, so the Islamist fractions of the Free Syrian Army that kicked out the secularists, and the secularists partly became part of the Syrian Democratic Forces later on, the Arab allies. But the Islamist fractions actually were reorganized by Turkey, and they get also financial and military aid from Turkey. So they are actually mercenaries of Turkey, and they help Turkey to occupy the Turkish occupied zones. Mainly, this is Afrin, that is originally a Kurdish region in the northwest, and Turkey attacked this region in 2018 and took it over. Most of the Kurdish civilians, not all of them, but most of them had to flee and were not allowed to return. And they lived in IDP camps in this region that was recently also attacked and taken over by the Syrian National Army around Tal Rifat. So they were displaced another time. The remaining SDF controlled areas. And the second region they control is the region that was occupied by Turkey in 2019, in October 2019, between a town called Tal Abyad that is predominantly Arabic, but also some predominantly Kurdish regions down around the town of Serikaniye, where also Kurds and Christians were displaced. And there are also some other pockets that were already controlled by these militias around Assas, so between Afrin and Kobani. These militias of the Syrian National Army actually used the chance to attack the Syrian Democratic Forces. And while Hayat Tahrir al-Sham was attacking the Syrian army, the regime army, the Syrian National Army attacked the Syrian Democratic Forces and took over this last remaining region of Afrin around Tal Rifat, and most recently the region of Manbij, so the city of Manbij and the surrounding villages. This was the SDF controlled territory west of the Euphrates River. Now, just today, people in Kobani are very much afraid that after a 4-day ceasefire ended without an extension, there could be also now an attack on Kobani. Kobani, the city that was attacked by ISIS in 2014. So 10 years after the Battle of Kobani, people are afraid in Kobani, and I'm in daily contact with some friends in Kobani, that there would be maybe another battle on Kobani against the Turkish Air Force and the Syrian National Army. Normally it's like that the Turkish army bombs and the Syrian National Army, or the different militias of the Syrian National Army, are the boots on the ground. Now, this Syrian National Army is in a way not a Syrian actor. They are just they're paid by Turkey, they do what Turkey tells them to do. Some of them are also a bunch of criminals, so sometimes they also fight with each other. So one militia within the Syrian National Army against the other, mainly for financial reasons or for influence over a certain village or something like that. And between the Syrian National Army / Turkey and the SDF is at the moment for sure the most difficult situation. We should not forget that there are also, of course, remains of the old Syrian Arab army, so the regime army, but they are not controlling any territory, and their equipment is in the last days systematically bombed by Israel, so they do not play a role in this power reconfiguration of Syria on the ground. But now let's talk about politics. Yeah? Right. So this, at the end of the day, sometimes the reality is a bit like Mao explained it, that the power comes from the rivals, but it's not only that. And Syria has a long tradition of an urban middle class and also of political parties.
Yep.
And not all of these political parties were with the regime, and not all of these political parties were armed. And some of these political parties, so for example, the so-called left, let's say it like this, in Syria, was always split between different communist parties who were either with the regime or in opposition to the regime. For example, there was a group, or there is still a group, but it never took up arms, called the Communist Workers' Party of Syria. It's a kind of Trotskyist political party that had a lot of support of Alawite intellectuals, so people from the same sect than Assad and his family was. But especially because there were a lot of Alawites, they suffered a very strict repression of the regime, because they were not just considered as opposition, they were considered as traitors of their own sectarian background. And some of these political parties who were repressed for decades also become active. And I know some people, for example, who are here in exile now in Europe, who think about returning back to Syria quite soon, and to rebuild also political structures of these parties. So for now, of course, only a few activists and very dedicated cadres of these opposition parties survived in Syria. But I think for the future, it is at least important to observe also what how civilians organize, because at the end of the day, especially the capital of Syria, Damascus, is a very diverse city, and there are different political groups there, and the civilians of Damascus played an important role in taking over the city from the regime. And I'm sure that Hayat Tahrir al-Sham will not be able to control the political scene of Damascus alone, or at least, let's say it like that, if they want to do that, and if they want to continue to rule with their own salvation government from Idlib, with a Sunni man-only government without a single woman and without any participation of the ethnic and religious minorities, of Syria. So there's not a single Druze, no Alawite, no Shiite, no Kurd, and no woman minister. And so if they want to continue that way, they will face a lot of civil resistance, especially in this capital city. So I think at the end of the day, there are Hayat Tahrir al-Sham has only two options. Either they are able to compromise with other political forces, Syria, or some kind of conflict will continue and they struggle a lot to rule Syria alone.
Yeah, so going from where you ended there, I know in one of your updates a few days back, you had talked about how the transitional government had suspended the constitution and the parliament, but there hadn't been anything put in its place. What's the situation of transitional government at the moment, and is something coming together, or is it still very fractured at this point? And as far as an actual government,
I can absolutely understand that you suspend the Syrian
right?
constitution because it was the constitution of a very authoritarian nationalist Arab Republic of Syria. So this constitution is nothing to defend. But if you want to construct a rule-based system, you want to construct a rule of law, then you have to at least issue some transitional basic law, even if it's only 2 pages. No?
Right.
And you cannot just disband everything and create such a transitional government. At the moment, what works relatively smoothly is to really hand over the offices of the government. So the bureaucracy is working again, and the bureaucracy is working under the rule of this former Salvation government, now transitional government of Syria. But that also means that the new rulers somehow inherit the authoritarian structure of the
right.
previous Syrian state. And this is not a good sign at all, especially if you know that this state had dozens of mukhabarats, of secret services, and that it was a very repressive system. Because for now, the prisoners, including the political prisoners, are freed, and this is a good, great moment of joy for the Syrians. But I see some alarming signals that the new rulers could take over some of the authoritarian traditions and structures, at least, of the old Syrian state. I think it would be a really disastrous sign if this government, as it is now, would stay in power as it was announced until March. I think there is an urgent need to include other political forces, especially other ethnic and sectarian groups, towards a government that must be more inclusive than the government now. There are negotiations going on. I know that there are negotiations going on, for example, between the Syrian Democratic Forces and the transitional government and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. So for now, I think it's too early to lose all hope that these negotiations could lead to a change. But we can measure the new government and we can measure Hayat Tahrir al-Sham only for what they are doing and not for what they are announcing. The announcements of Al-Julani, of the leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, sound very nice. They are inclusive. He even mentioned once that the Kurds are definitely part of Syria. that the IDPs from Afrin should be able to return. So these are all nice words, but there is the need for actions to follow. And for now, I do not see that. The problem is a bit, although I don't know how Giuliani himself really thinks, but the problem is a bit that I guess Giuliani has to fulfill some wishes of his own supporters as well. So even if Giuliani would wish to be more inclusive, it could be difficult for him to completely withdraw from a radical Islamist agenda, because the basis of his militia of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is ideologically still very close to Al Qaeda. It includes even some former ISIS fighters that fled to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. So he has to control his own supporters somehow. So even without having any sympathies for him, I think we have to see that he's also not in an easy position concerning that. But it will be very crucial for the development if he managed to both control Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and his own supporters, but also negotiate a more inclusive transitional government, and to enable, at the end of the day, the Syrian people to choose about their future. And on a side front, I mean, it's a side front from the perspective of Damascus, but it's definitely not a side front for the Kurds and the people who live in the north. The big question is how to contain Turkey, because I could imagine that there would be at least a solution for a transitional period between Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and SDF. So they could agree somehow on some basic principles, like we work on a re-establishment of a sovereign country. We agree upon some kind of federalism for now, or something like that. After some elections happen, maybe we can work on a permanent constitution in the future. Something like this is imagined. But the Syrian National Army, so these pro-Turkish proxies, mercenaries, they are not a Syrian national force.
Right.
Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is an ally of Turkey, but they are not a proxy of Turkey. They still have their own Syrian agenda, but the Syrian National Army is only a proxy of Turkey. So if we want to stop the war there is pressure needed on Turkey and to leave Syria, and to allow a transitional process that includes the Kurds. And this, I think, will be the most difficult step at the moment, to keep Turkey at least contained, that the civil war does not continue between the pro-Turkish forces and the Turkish army and the Syrian Democratic Forces. Especially, so even if you don't have any sympathies for the Kurds or for the SDF, keep in mind that there are thousands of ISIS fighters that are arrested by the Syrian Democratic Forces. They're in prisons there. So if the pro-Turkish proxies would really invade the core land of the Syrian Democratic Forces and would destroy what is called the democratic administration of North and East Syria, it would be very much likely that thousands of highly ideologized, fanatic, and fighters with a lot of experience in fighting and least many of them also experienced war criminals, would just leave these prisons and would restart ISIS. So we're not only talking about these women and children in Al-Hol or in Rosh. They might, some of them, yes, some of them are still dangerous, but most of them would not be terrorist danger at the moment. But we're talking about thousands of the hardcore male fighters. And we know what happened in October 2019 when Turkey invaded Tel Abyad and Serikaniye, that they more or less liberated camp near Ainissa, where the women and children were held, but there were also prisons attacked, and the ISIS members fighters could flee. So this would be, I think, the worst case scenario, that another revival of ISIS could emerge from these really dangerous jihadis that are now under control of the Syrian Democratic Forces.
Yeah, and just, we don't have a lot of time left, but I just wanted to, other than what I've been seeing from you, two of the pieces that I've heard coming out in some of the media about the government itself. I read it in two places, a story about somebody who was in charge of the courts saying that women should no longer be able to take legal cases, something like this.
Yeah, but this seems to be a wrong information.
Right. It didn't seem like it made sense, though.
Yeah. No, at least for now, there's no official ban of female judges.
Right. And then I saw that, they were saying that schools were back in session, like in Damascus, and I saw it appeared to be a normal school. It was young boys and girls together in a classroom. There was nothing that led me to believe.
No, for now, there's no Taliban-like regime in Damascus. No, right. The girls can go to school. They still can go to school together with the boys. Women are allowed to study at universities. So for now, nothing like that has happened in the newly liberated territories. I don't know if this will continue like this.
Right.
But for now, the new transitional government did not create a strict Sharia-like legal system.
Yeah, and this is the kind of rumor and incorrect information that we need to guard against, to make sure that that people are making their decisions and assessments based on the reality of what's going on.
Yeah,
well, I really appreciate you speaking with me. I think this does help to understand what's going on the ground, and where we're at right now. Because I think internationally, everybody should really be paying attention to what's going on. I think it's it's extremely important. So
absolutely, and also for the region. I think at the moment the international community would have a lot of possibilities to have a positive influence. Syria is destroyed. Syria needs international support, also financial. And if we want to prevent another maybe 2 million Syrians fleeing the country in the future, we have to invest into the reconstruction of the infrastructure, of the houses, of the economy of Syria. But of course, such an investment can be connected with some basic rules. We invest into Syria if the new rulers accept and respect human rights, if they respect also minority and women rights that are integral part of human rights. So I think we would have some possibilities to influence this development if we do not abstain from the region. And this is bit the danger at the moment that we do not know at all how the new American administration under Trump will act. Trump himself announced that they should withdraw from Syria or that they should not do anything concerning Syria. I doubt that the European Union will be able to speak in one voice and somehow replace the Americans. I'm a bit more hopeful about the Arab neighbors. Not that they are very democratic systems, but they also don't want that Syria goes into another round of civil war. They don't want that Turkey actually takes over the country. So it's also in the interests of Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and the United Arab Emirates, for example, to stabilize Syria at least. And some of these countries would also have enough money to invest into Syria. So maybe there's something coming from that direction. But I really think to not to get involved now would be a mistake.
I agree with you. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm sure we'll talk again at some point in the future.
Thank you very much.
And that's our interview. Thanks for listening. Solidarity.